Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eve Tamme. I'm the chair of Zero Emissions Platform. So that's an organization that is an advisor to the EU on all things carbon capture and storage. And I'm very excited to moderate the next session where we'll hear from the wealth of experience of our very diverse panelists on how to develop a single market for carbon capture and storage. Obviously, this whole cross-border transportation is a huge element for developing CCS in Europe. We do have a lot of borders between countries. Europe is fragmented, and we need to figure it all out between the EU states and also expanding it to the EFTA states. We'll be also discussing and maybe reflecting on the Commission's strategic approach to the CCS and the plans there. But the main goal is to focus what the future will look like, what the future should look like, what are the business models and the economics and types of actors who would be involved, and who should ideally do what in the way we build out CCS in Europe. And of course, we'll also discuss technological developments. So in terms of future, we're discussing 2030 and beyond. I think it's not shown here, but that's our timetable. And as I mentioned, we have a great panel with a wealth of experience. So I'll quickly introduce them before we get into the discussion. I think I will start from next to me and then move on from here. Everyone has a mic, I hope. Yes, okay, that's good. We're all set. So we have Grete Tveit, who is Senior Vice President, Low Carbon Solutions at Equinor, and she brings with her more than 30 years of experience in the oil and gas sector. And obviously, as you already heard also from the minister's keynote in the beginning, Equinor has these two existing carbon capture projects in Norway, and also is currently developing on the CO2 transportation project that connects Europe with the storage in the North Sea. There's going to be a wealth to learn from here, and obviously I hope lots of good suggestions what to do. Then we have Alex Bacot from DG Klima. He's a Director for Innovation for Low Carbon Resilient Economy. Alex has had a long career in the Commission, both in DG Environment and DG Klima. Previously has also held the positions of Head of Units and an Assistant to the Director General. So from Alex, we expect to hear the Commission's strategic approach. And of course, as a policymaker, as a legislator, be prepared. I will start with you. So then moving on, we have Lina Nagel, who is Senior Manager at Bellona. She's the topic lead for sustainable finance and economy and has ample experience in policy fields related to finance, banking and energy, but of course also in CCS, and that's what she's here to discuss today, sharing the environmental NGO perspective on why do we need CCS and how does it need to be scaled up in the proper way and the proper scale. And further to my left is Eda Aradottir. She is the CEO of Carbfix, and she has worked on subsurface CO2 mineralization that you already heard about. So this new type of storing CO2 already since 2007. So lots of experience there, and we will of course learn about Carbfix's technology and also what's coming up from them, and also what they expect to see from the future of this EU single market that we are creating for CCS. So this is my quick introduction because I don't want to keep us longer. I want to dig into the details, and I'm also not going to have introductory remarks from the speakers. We're going straight to the questions, straight discussing the issues. And as I said, I will start with Alex because I think we heard the commissioner outline a lot of the general plans and visions. You are in the director position heading this more practical work. So it would be great to hear from you, first of all, the expectations for the upcoming industrial carbon management strategy. Ideally, the way you can complement what we have already heard, because there is plenty that is expected of it. And also, maybe if you can get specific with which problems is it aiming to fix?
Thank you very much. Yes, you hear me a bit?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you also for conveying this very, I think, interesting and very timely event, because I think what I hear from the first panel and from the invitation and what we will hear today is that we are really coming at a very important moment in time. We see a big momentum being created around CCS and CCU. So I think if you could put the mic a bit up, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I don't have any voice tonight to call my mum. But if you want me to give a bit more detail about what we are planning for next week, I'm afraid I will not be able to say much more than what the commissioner said. Well tried, Yves. I know you well, so that you were trying to get me into the details of what we're going to propose. What I can tell you a bit is maybe going through the key issues we see with this sector, because it's still a very early phase of deployment. What we see in the market at the moment is a lot of interest from industry on the capture side. So industry is really getting serious. They see the ETS carbon price. They see the prospects of the further targets we will set for 2040. So clearly, the capturing of the CO2 for further storage or use is becoming really, really critical in the strategies of the hard-to-abate sectors. And we see that very concretely when we look at the applications under the Innovation Fund. I don't know if you're aware about this big fund, which is created under the EU ETS. It's about 40 billion euros, which is available for industry to decarbonize, to really move from pilot to commercialization of innovative projects. And there we have seen in the last 2.5 years that we have been operating this innovation fund, that a quarter of the project that we are going to finance, so more than 25 projects, relate to CCUS. So it's about 2.5 billion euros of projects that we are going to award, that we are awarding for companies who want to capture the CO2 and do something useful with it. So for us, it's a very important signal. And when we look at the overall value chain, the key problem we see at the moment is not so much the capture, but it's really about the storage and the transport. But let me first look at the storage. On the storage side, there we hear very good project in Norway. We're very welcoming all the efforts being done in Norway in particular, but we need more than that. We need also storage capacity elsewhere in Europe, in the EU, so that we also address these cross-border issues. Because I was reading this morning a report from Greece, cement industry, saying, yeah, we're ready to capture, but where is our CO2 going? And I'm not sure it's going to go to Norway. Maybe, I don't know. Let's see the economic conditions. But still, we will need to find other ways to really store the CO2. And this is why the Net Zero Industry Act is so important. So the 50 million tons requirement on the oil and gas industry, and by the way, it's a historical moment, because first time ever, we have obligation on oil and gas with regard to climate policy. Please. Yes, no, it's very important, very important, because it's really the first step to make sure that really we have the oil and gas industry getting their responsibility, and they have the knowledge, as we know, about these potential storage sites. And maybe just to finish on the transport side, and I think the minister has already, the commissioner has already said a lot about it, so I will not say too much. But here we also see the need to create a single market. We need to have CO2 as a commodity. Today we have natural gas as a commodity. In the long term, we want CO2 as well as hydrogen to become really commodities for Europe, because we need to create the solutions for industry to capture the CO2 and do something useful with it. So this is what we're going to try to do with this strategy that we will adopt next week. It's still in the making, so I can't say much more than that, but we'll be very happy to also get reactions. It is not coming only from our brains, it's really coming from an exercise of consultation. So the CCUS forum has played a very important role to gather feedback, input from various sides of industry.
Thanks so much, Alex. Now, this is quite loud, but I'll try to be more quiet. So I think this was a great opening, and I would like to now explore it a bit further with the other panelists and ask you, what do you see being these key conditions currently missing so that we would be able to scale the CCS up as required? Maybe I'll start next to me with Grete.
I borrow yours, thank you. Sharing is caring, you know. First of all, let me mention what I think is actually in place to make this happen. And our minister mentioned that we have actually in Norway done CCS for nearly 30 years. And we have done it safely without any leakages. So this is safe and known technology. So let's start from that bit at least. And then what do we need to scale this up to actually take care of and deliver on the energy transition? I think we need a lot more storage, of course. And for that, we need these regulations and processes in place, and they should be the same all across the area. For now, they're not there. And so it's a bit difficult for us that want to put in place and get this business started when we don't have these rules and regulations, because we need to guess when we enter into our commercial negotiations with the customers, what will the regulations be like? And we don't know. So that is one thing. The other thing is, of course, we need to be allowed to transport CO2 from one country to the other countries. So bilateral agreements for transporting CO2 needs to be in place. I know that is imminent, and I don't think that will stop anything. Then what we are planning to do, and it's about the transportation of CO2, because we have a lot of storage capacity on the Norwegian continental shelf. Norway don't have, we have a lot of emissions, but we don't have as much emissions as industry emissions here in Europe. So what we are looking to put in place is a transport mechanism that is cheaper than the ship solution, and that is to put in place a pipeline. A pipeline from Europe, continental Europe, to the Norwegian shelf will cut the cost of transporting CO2 by 50%. So making this more commercial is, of course, an important element. But still what we see is that the first customers, and as you alluded to, they applied for Innovation Fund. They probably need funding support because the EU ETS is not enough to make it commercial in the initial phase. So having Innovation Fund and predictable kind of boxes maybe to tick to get that funding would be good, because what we and Equinor depend on here to actually put in place the pipeline I'm talking about is 1,000 kilometers pipeline. It costs about 4 billion euros to put in place. We need customers. And we can't take an investment decision on this pipeline until we know there is customers. So that means that our customers need to move towards their FID. without making sure we have the store and the pipeline there, and there needs to be onshore transportation, and we need terminals from the onshore to the offshore transportation. So it is a large pipeline that need to be matured in parallel, and we need to be able to take the FID more or less in parallel. So we need some support, we need the rules and regulations, and we need to work together in a collaborative way. Then I think we will make it. And as an oil and gas company, we try to do what we should do, and making a lot of storage capacity available. And we do it in our home turf, which is Norway, where we know the geology. And we see on the screen how this works. I think we can make this together, but let's make sure the processes and procedures put in place don't stop kind of utilizing Iceland's storage capacity and Norway capacity, because we're not part of EU. We're together in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Lena. Let's see how the mics work.
Hello? Oh, that's very loud. I'll also try to be calm. Oh. Yeah. I'll just keep on talking. So we can find, is it good? Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm very happy to hear a lot of those perspectives that are being brought on today, and also, of course, that this conference is being held, because I think my main kind of initial comment will be, it's so important here that we focus on a European perspective. No country, and this is just, it's not just kind of a naive vision, this is a necessity. No country has enough emitters or enough storage to do this commercially on its own. So this is something that we need to ensure. And I'm very happy, of course, to hear that the Net Zero Industry Act is being brought up. Congratulations. It really is a tremendous piece of work. And I think here as well, we can draw the parallel into what we're all talking about, the need for a common market. And I think the Net Zero Industry Act was quite an interesting example on some of the discussions that were going on in the lead up to now what we are seeing as quite successful trilogues. Because in the Net Zero Industry Act, there is now a EU target, but there were quite a lot of discussions if this should be an EEA target. But of course, this would not be feasible, because you simply cannot have an EEA target when there is so much uncertainty related to the implementation of EU legislation into EFTA states. So I think this is also something that we need to address. And I think this is a great forum to mention that point. I think this is a market where we see there is a lot of investment risk, and this is what we need to address. And legislation-wise, we do have some of them. I also want to mention, because I'm very happy to hear, of course, that Equinor is working on this. And I think that what we also need to bear in mind when we are talking about infrastructure, such as pipelines, is, of course, that when we have big market players, when we have public funding sources involved, and we have public perception issues connected to this, we need to make sure that we are in fact optimizing the public good nature of this infrastructure, because we are not developing a CCS for profit margins. We understand there needs to be a business case. We need to be able to make money of this for it to be commercially available, but we're doing this for climate. So when we are talking about here infrastructure and public funding in the same sentence, we need to make sure that we have market regulation that is ensuring equal access. We need to make sure that we don't have some market players, and with all respect to the oil and gas sector as well, we have to reduce monopolistic tendencies, and we know that regulation is necessary to do this because we have experience with this from different countries, including Norway. So this is one of the many reasons why we are so happy and excited about the industrial carbon management strategy coming, hearing everyone being so dedicated to a common market, and kind of encouraging here that we make sure that there is clear transparency on how the prices are set, how the infrastructure is accessible, and also on what parameters we are dedicating public funds to different projects. it's not always the cheapest option that is the best. Sometimes it's geographic dispersity, sometimes it's new technology, and sometimes it's different market actors that together can ensure competition.
So is it my turn?
Yes, it's your turn. Sorry, I'm just switching off my mic because it's super sensitive, so I don't want to breathe into your interventions. But yeah, Eda, if you could share things from your perspective, because your perspective is slightly different, because you're looking at the developments in the EU policy from a solution that is not the typical type of CCS, but another way of doing it, but still achieving the same result, achieving similar durability and all of this. So please share what's missing.
Well, a number of issues are missing, and from the way we look at it, I mean, this will happen again. We will have new technologies coming in. Okay, yeah. Can't hear up here. We will have more examples of new emerging technologies that are not included in existing frameworks. But what we do have is a new technology that has been proven to work, and we have been operating this at a small scale, yes, but still at a measurable impact in Iceland from our geothermal power plants, where we've been capturing and permanently mineralizing CO2 for 10 years now. And I think if we look at what's in place, we have the CCS directive, we have the ETS system in Europe, and both of them together provide a good framework for CCS. But as mentioned, they're written for something else. They're not written for our technologies. They were written for what was being done in the North Sea when these legislations were put in place, which is very understandable. But finally, we're at the point where there is an ongoing review of at least the guidance documents for the CCS directive that is partly addressing this sort of lack of technical neutrality in the framework, and we very much welcome that and appreciate having been invited to share what we and our partners and the technology that we deploy. It was co-developed between industry and academia. So from the very beginning, very high focus on the scientific part of things. How do we monitor? How do we track? How do we prove when and how the CO2 does in fact mineralize in the subsurface? So all of this we can share and feed into, hopefully soon published updated guidance documents for the CCS directive. So in addition to making sure that any policy, whether it's existing or new, being technology neutral, so we're already future-proofing for either new, already emerging technologies or what's coming tomorrow, it's critical, because otherwise we lose momentum, which we simply can't afford. But in addition to that, I want to highly emphasize, I mean, the reference was made to sort of storage being lacking, but when it comes to developing storage sites, this takes a long time. And we have to understand the subsurface. We have to, design how we're going to develop it. We have to do exploratory drilling, and then comes the permitting process, and that is simply too stringent, too long. Of course, we need a robust process to provide permits to climate critical projects, but in my opinion, we can make these existing processes more efficient. And I think when we look into the coming future and the highly drastic scale up of CCS and other climate critical sectors, we have to be able to get these permits more efficiently and in a shorter period of time than we are able to do today. If we look into individual countries, because like Equinor, we use different type of geologic formations, but the formations that we use, they are found not all over, but in many parts of the world. On all the continents, we find the basalt formations that we target. Number of countries in Europe. So it is critical that European governments actually implement, the European legislation that's put in place, so that we can actually build projects across the continent. And then maybe just on a final note, if we look at it from those of us that are developing the projects, the first movers, whether it's in offshore storage, whether it's in mineralization, the way we do it, I think we can do more of collaborate to a level. I mean, of course, you know, we are competing for the CO2 in a way and so forth, but this is such a new and emerging market that we can and should do more of collaborating, sharing knowledge across the value chain as well as between projects, because all of us are dealing with some of the, you know, similar struggles. And to name maybe two of the issues that you know, we are currently struggling with, not just us, but other storage projects. It is on the one hand lack of standards for the chemical composition and the purity of CO2 that's being transported. This is important, you know, to make sure that the transport infrastructure is not subject to corrosive materials, but it's also important for the storage part. I mean, you can't inject whatever, you know. So this is one of the areas where there are no standards. And another one is long-term liability after CO2 has been injected, after storage operators have demonstrated safe permanent storage of CO2. Still, a very long time of liability phase lies ahead, and that's sort of how is that risk shared in the market across the value chain. So those are some, you know, two of the sort of non-resolved issues, and it's understandable that they haven't been resolved. But I think here we can do more of simply discussing them jointly, because in the end we need the scale up of the market.
So much I saw some people almost like wanted to react, so I will give you the chance, please.
Thank you so much. Possible between our two ways of storing CO2 actually to agree on a specification, so that there is one specification for all the capture projects that they need to relate to. So it's only one way to just illustrate how panel like this and a coincident dinner actually creates a collaboration, which I think is extremely important. And also a comment to you mentioned, yes, allow for all technologies. Let's make sure we allow for all technologies that are safe to store CO2. We have a lack of storage. We need to use all the tools in the tool. And let's also make sure we allow European CO2 or EU CO2 to be stored in Iceland or in Norway, not to limit it. Because as you said, I strongly believe that in the next few years, it will be a demand for more than we actually have available. And I think let's then make sure we don't put restrictions on ourselves.
Can I react to that? Yes. No, just maybe a few things on this question of transport of CO2 between the EU and Norway. I think I want to be very clear with that. We will also clarify it in the upcoming strategy, is that the London Protocol is implemented through the EU acquis. So from our perspective, there is no need for bilateral agreements. And we will put that very clearly in writing, so that we avoid, confusion that, that there would be constraints to the shipping of or the transporting of CO2 to Norway. Now, just if I can maybe just also jump on one topic which you also mentioned, which is I think very important, is to bring together the different actors. Because when you said that you need the FID of the capturing side to be able to make your final investment decision on the transport and the pipeline, I think it shows how important it is that that all these actors of the value chain talk to each other and coordinate as best as possible. And I think there we have some good example of what we can also help with in the Commission. In the context of the Innovation Fund, and I'm looking at Anka, my colleague, because I will give you the floor in 1 minute, so get ready. We are in the context of the Innovation Fund, looking at how to bring this knowledge sharing into a real practice. And last year, as part of the CCUS forum, Anka and the colleagues organized, I think, a very useful knowledge sharing event. So maybe you can say a few words. Can I give the floor to my colleague? Yes, she's in the room here. So if the microphone could be passed to her, she can say a few words about this event, because I think it shows how concretely we can really help. Yes, please.
We're experimenting here, going off script. Please introduce yourself with name, and we know where you work already at the European Commission. Please, here you go.
Thank you. So I am Anca Petre. I work with Alex in DG Clima on CCS, and indeed, last year in November we had the second knowledge sharing workshop, and it's part of many others which we want to organize moving forward for projects that have applied or have been funded by the Innovation Fund. I think many of you, or at least some of you in this room, have been present at that knowledge sharing workshop, and we hope it was useful. And we encourage this kind of exchanges because it's the only way that technology can move forward and become more accessible. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much. I think it's great how we're making this session much more dynamic. That's a panel discussion usually is. And yes, we will get to the Q&A with you as well, but just bear with us. I want to explore a few more topics also with the panelists. But thank you, Eda, for making very pointed arguments for what is missing. My understanding is that on the standardization, there might be some good news to expect. You don't need to nod if you cannot, but there might be some good news coming up in the upcoming industrial carbon management strategy, because the way the Brussels works, the drafts tend to leak, and we get to peek into some things that are in preparation. Of course, things can change, and we will only see the final version next week. But that's one of the elements that is critical, because there are already stakeholders building projects, and they need to know what they're building for. Hence, we need to have these standards ready as soon as possible. Good points on the bilateral agreements. I think the interesting aspect there is that whilst we always hear that there is no need to have bilateral agreements, for some reason the governments are very keen to have them, and that is the reality. So I guess it's something that needs to be discussed in more depth at some point. You want to react to it now?
Just say, yeah, I mean, how can we avoid, two governments to want to agree on something, but we also want to facilitate that, of course. But just we want to be clear also that legally this is not required.
And I understand Eda wants to.
If I can just add, if it's not needed, let's rather spend the time on actually developing the projects rather than negotiating bilateral agreements that are not needed. But that's just my comment. And then, of course, not everything is done offshore. So then the London Protocol doesn't even apply. So but yeah, I would like to understand as well why effort is being spent on something that's not needed, because we are really lacking behind when it comes to actually delivering CO2 safely injected into the ground.
Thanks so much. When we get to the Q&A with the audience, if there are people here who can explain why they are needed, we will also allow comments on that, but the rest have to be questions. Now, I would like to explore specifically with Eda and Grete, because you are both developing projects, either storage or both storage and infrastructure. If we talk about the single markets, because that's the topic of today, which part of the value chain is currently the one where we are lacking the most, that is preventing us from having the single market? Is that storage? Because I keep hearing a lot of that. Or is there something else we want to mention in this context? We can, let's start with Grete.
Thank you. Yes, we are lacking storage. Just listen to the ambition of 50 million ton per year by 2030. And I'm lacking microphone, I guess. I have some friends here. That's good. So 50 million tons per year by 2030. Today, of the open source CO2 transport and storage projects, I only know about 2 FIDs, and this is Porthos and Northern Lights, and they're both fully booked, and they don't have a lot of capacity. So we were awarded in Equinor a large CO2 storage license on the Norwegian continental shelf 2 years ago. It has a storage capacity, we believe, of about 20 million ton per year. That is contributing, but we are not able to have it up and operating before 2028. We did participate in the Danish license round last Wednesday, and kind of what the Danish state say, that it needs to be operational by 2030. So typical, it takes like 6 years from when you are awarded a license until it's up and running. So 6 years from now, that's 2030. So where are the 50 million ton per year? I think we need to run extremely fast to get there. And I hope also that you have some better track record in Iceland when it comes to the timing. But I think an effort on actually awarding licenses in the early phase is very important. Yes, Innovation Fund see a lot of industries that want to capture their CO2, but then, as also Kadri Simpson mentioned, connecting the dots here with transportation system is extremely important, and that is why we like to put in place the pipeline, as I mentioned, because ship is also a solution, but it also takes quite a long time to build these ships. So I think there is a huge sense of urgency. So let's not make any details that are not necessary stop us. I don't know about the bilateral agreements. I know that Norway say we need them, so I trust my government on that.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, again, coming to the time it takes to develop storage. Of course, it takes time to drill well, to build infrastructure, but it doesn't take 6 years or longer. We have in previous project done it in a year and a half. That was not the biggest project, but still, it required the well. It required, all the components. It was for, CDR, carbon dioxide removal. So we. I try again.
Technology is really taking on a life of its own. So here we go.
I forgot what I was at. Now I was saying we can deliver projects in shorter time, but again, coming to the permitting process, an EIA, then a storage permit, it has to be cut down in half. That's my opinion, and then we should be able to in no longer than 5 years, and that's for large scale projects deliver storage.
On this issue of permitting, I fully agree with you. We need to be better. And this is also the purpose of the NZIA, the Net Zero Industry Act, really for these strategic projects. And that's why CCS is part of these strategic projects that member states, and if Norway and Iceland decide to join for this particular piece of law, there is a clear need to boost and to speed up the permitting.
Thank you. So we have learned that only one mic on at one time, and we all know how the buttons works now. So it's all good because we still have some time to go. Because you can count at 3 o'clock. We'll have a coffee break, but I think there's plenty of good stuff to go through still. I want to continue with Lena because we talk about drilling the wells and getting these things done in practice and public acceptance or public perception. I mean, these terms come up a lot. NGOs, of course, are working on it. Different NGOs have different views. But what I keep hearing from project developers recently, for example, I think it was from France, they say it's very difficult. There can be very local civil society groups that are just completely opposed, and it's difficult to get these projects being built, even if they take, and then knowing that it takes so long to build. Of course, we need to reduce the lead times, but how should we go about, what are the critical things we should do to try to fix this?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much, of course, to the organizer of this event for including civil society. That's actually one of the issues that very often when we are discussing CCS, civil society or actors who maybe strongly disagree are not included. And we can understand that Bologna has been working on CCS for 3 decades. We can understand that sometimes it can be uncomfortable to have conversations with people who disagree with you, maybe have a different understanding of the issue, but that's exactly why they need to be included. So just to repeat, a big thank you to the organizers here. I think when we look at CCS and public perception, and we try not to speak of public acceptance, because we think that that implies that we are trying to force people to accept this. That is not taking their concerns seriously, and I think that is very important to do. So the CCUS Forum's working group now on public perception, which I think will continue this year as well, has been extremely useful, because it brings together different actors who can actually discuss what are the issues. Because it's not one issue. We know that one issue is safety, but we actually know that another issue is what role should CCS play? Oil and gas is heavily involved in CCS. That's an image problem for CCS, because historically that is a concern. So we know that this is something that we need to take very seriously. What we have discovered is that we need to have a dialogue that is not so much based on a top-down approach, where you are preaching of why this is so safe and why you should just accept it. It is to meet local communities in particular with the science, with the actual information, and to explain why this is so necessary. And for this as well, it's really important, the narratives surrounding CCS. We have to make sure we focus on this not being a silver bullet, because a lot of the time we can hear estimates and modeling, all of a sudden CCS will save the whole show. This is one part of the solution. It is not the solution. So I think that we need to continue, and I really think public perception is one of those issues that has been a little bit left to left at the end. And I think now we are really starting to see that everyone is taking this very seriously, the Commission as well. I think we really need to work more on this, because we need to identify how can we actually talk to people and address some of the concerns that are existing.
Thanks so much. I think Grete was first, and I see Eda wants to come in also. So Grete.
Thank you. What I think is so important, as you say, is listen to those who are worried, and we should. And very often we hear, as an oil and gas company, that we are doing this to greenwash our own oil and gas production. And then I have to mention the 4 customers we have for Northern Lights. It's cement, which represents, is it about 8% of the CO2 emissions in the world? It is waste incineration. They don't have any other alternatives. It is fertilizing, and it is biogenic CO2, so negative emissions. There is no oil and gas connected to it. And I think that needs to be part of the story that we kind of communicate together. This is not greenwashing of the oil and gas industry, but it is so that the oil and gas industry, for all our lives, have been depending on knowing the subsurface. That is a key competence to actually find the oil and gas. We use the exact same competence to find the CO2 storage, because it needs to have this very tight cap rock so that the CO2 is not leaking. So it's kind of the same technology and the same knowledge. Then we also drill the wells, which we have done for oil and gas. Now we do it for injecting CO2. And we put in place pipelines, as we have done. So it's a lot of the same capabilities. So I think it is quite natural in the beginning that this is oil and gas companies leading on, but it's not greenwashing. It is moving into another industry, not with those large margins, but still with some smaller margins that makes it possible to move on.
Thanks so much, Grete. I think it's a very, very clear message. Eda.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly comment. I first of all, I could not agree more. But also when it comes to stakeholder engagement, it is important that it's not just the project developers telling it's safe. And I mean, even in our case, the CO2 mineralizes, and everybody can see a rock doesn't leak. But of course, the public has questions, and we're able to address the questions. But to have a larger sort of community, whether it's scientists or some of the NGOs. I think it has to be a joint effort, because there is always an extra bit of skepticism when it's the project developer, being the only party explaining this or that. So just that it has to be our joint effort within the sector.
Yes, thanks so much. So now there's going to be last question for me. This is for Alex. And then we go to the Q&A. I already saw some hands, so I'm sure they will come up soon. And because I have to ask this question, otherwise it probably will come up one way or another anyway. But if you can share anything at all, I'm sure there is something. If we look now at the incoming commission, what will be the key decisions they will need to take on CCS, and basically or also when should we expect the first wave of legislative proposals on CCS?
Okay, it's always difficult because you want me to predict the future, which I'm not going to do. But what I can tell you is an important element in the debate, not only about CCS, but also about CCU and removals, will be the review of the ETS directive. So by 2026, there is a review clause, so the package of the climate legislation will be looked at again, and we will have to look at this question of how to reward as best as possible the CO2 which is captured, and look also at the accounting, because you were talking about the pipelines. Indeed, there will be pipelines across Europe. This is our vision, transporting CO2 from the place of capture to the place of storage or use. But there will be different sources of this carbon. So this carbon will come from, to a certain extent, fossil. There will still be a bit of fossil. They will be captured from biogenic source, the biomass. They will be, in the future, captured from the air as well, with DACs. There will be the remaining emissions from the hard-to-abate sectors. So all this carbon will be put in the same pipeline. But at the end of the day, if we want to have negative emissions removals, we will need to have a serious accounting, because these pipelines, they will have, as I said, this mixture of carbon, and we'll have at the end of the day to be able to trace and account the CO2 in the right way. So I think this is going to occupy us quite a lot, to have a right framework in place so that it's very transparent, and that also stakeholders, civil society, really trust the way it is set up, and also the way we best incentivize. So I would say, yeah, one thing which will be important is the ETS review.
Thanks. I'm not going to let you off the hook yet, because we know that there's going to be the strategy coming out next week. And now, so this is the question to the Commission more broadly, not necessarily to DG Klima. If there are suggestions in the strategy for potential legislative proposals, and if the new Commission would follow on the same path, how long would it take the Commission to kind of get the first proposals out the door? So not necessarily on ETS, but there are other areas like CO2 transport.
Too early to say. I would say I don't want, the Commissioner didn't say anything about timing. I'm not going to say anything.
Okay.
But what I can say from the climate perspective, one of the first legislative proposals we'll have to do is the climate law. So the 2040 targets will have to be proposed as part of legislation. So this is going to be one of most likely the first act that the Commission will put together. And then how to get to these 2040 targets, which pieces of legislation to be amended, changed, that we will see with the next college.
Thank you so much. And I tried. So thank you for your patience. We'll now open it up for the Q&A. I suggest I take 3 questions in one round, and then we'll hear back from the panelists. And thank you, Edda, for donating your mic, because someone had to do it.
I have a first question here, and I thought I saw one on the front. And now we have 2 male participants, so I'm going to challenge one of the female participants to bring us a question as well. Paul Frisvold, please introduce yourself with your name and where you come from.
Thank you very much. I'm a man from Norway, Paul Frisvold. I worked a long time for promoting CCS for Bellona, and now I'm with Greenpeace. I'd like to pay tribute to the Icelandic ambassador, because he really said that we must make sure this technology just does not become an excuse to prolong the fossil age and fossil industry. And Mrs. Tveit of Equinor eloquently said, and I'm pleased to hear that it is only meant for the energy intensive, hard to abate sectors, right? So then my question is to Alexandre Pacaud from the Commission, because some of us have actually seen an early draft of that communication, and it has been referred to in Norwegian media as well. And one of the things that we are a little bit puzzled with is that you actually, in opposition to the scientific advisory bodies report that came out last week as well, we understand that you argue for using CCS on power production. Now, for us who were involved in the early times of ZEP, all the fossil utilities actually pulled out at an early stage because we do not see the necessity. So I'd just like to challenge you a little bit on to what extent that is actually the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So next question is here, and the others, I'm sure you'll get inspired as the questions come up. It would be great to get the third one in as well, please.
Thank you very much. My name's Matt Dinskowski. I'm working in DG Competition on state aid in energy. I've got a linked question. So it's 2 parts. One part is, can any of you say anything about the costs of different carbon capture and storage technologies? Sorry, thanks. Can any of you say anything about the costs of different carbon capture and storage technologies now, or projected cost decreases, if that's interesting? Maybe in like euros per ton of CO2. For full costs, basically capture and storage and transport if necessary. And then the other question is related to Paul's question. There's a lot of discussion in the power sector about flexibility recently, and that's mostly focused on demand response and storage. And the storage includes hydrogen, that's very expensive at the moment, a way of storing electricity and then remaking electricity, burning the electricity to make power. Should there be more discussion about CCS in that context, like in relation to flexibility for power generation, not for running like many hours a year or coal or gas-based power stations, but for a small number of hours for winter periods where you might have a week of very cold weather and not enough wind, for example?
Thank you for that. Well, we did get 3 questions. So, okay, let's have a lady as well, because then adds to the mix.
Thank you. I'm Katrin Måge, Offshore Norge. So we heard here that actually it's not enough projects to meet 50 million tons in 2030 in EU. So wouldn't it be a great idea to include Norway, include Iceland, to meet the 50 million tons in 2030, then we can achieve it?
Okay, so we will start with, I guess, Alex.
So just to reassure Paul, I think we are with you. Huh? So CCS for us is clearly for hard to abate sectors. This is the priority. So first, I mean, you will see this is part of also the broader 2040 communication, which is a lot about emission reduction. This is the top priority, to mitigate emissions. But we know that some sectors, there will be emissions that are not cannot be cut, and that's where the CCUS, I would say, enter into play. So I mean, yeah, happy to get you specific comments, but this is at least what the main point we want to bring in this strategy. In terms of 50 million tons with or without Norway, at the moment it's without Norway, and we have really strong reinsurance also from the oil and gas industry that this is realistic numbers. So we're not talking crazy, and this is also feasible in terms of timeline. Now, if Norway would come and join and incorporate ENSIA, then these numbers will have to be, looked again, but upwards, at least double.
Feel free to continue.
So maybe on the power bit, you can have backup power to sun and wind, and yes, it is required. That can be power of various means. It could be coal. We don't like that. It could, of course, be nuclear. It could be hydrogen-fired power plants, but then you need a lot of storage for hydrogen, and that is very expensive. And for now, at least, it's quite limited. I believe that will come over time. What we're also working on, and what we see they do in UK, is gas-fired power plants with CCS. That is also possible. And we will welcome to store that CO2 from either the hydrogen production, if it is the blue hydrogen, or from the gas-fired power plants with CCS. When it comes to cost of this, so far, because we say we will start up in 2028, we are looking into the cost of actually putting in place both pipelines and the storage. So I don't have these numbers. But for now, what we see is actually when we add the capture, the transportation, and the storage, it's more than the EU ETS of today. That is why funding is requested. So that is at least an indication. I do believe that creating scale in this business will take down cost. We do believe, and as the minister talked about the technology center at Mongstad, we are testing out new capture technologies, and hopefully that will take down the costs as well. And when the business is matured, hopefully also storage will go down with scale. And maybe the EU ETS is turning the upward way so that we, in the early 2030 or around that time, actually can move this business forward without any funding support. But I don't have numbers, unfortunately.
Okay, let's see if we get some numbers from Eda.
I can share some numbers, but of course, cost of if we look at cost of storage, which of course I know most about, it highly depends on project-specific parameters. So whether it's scale, whether it's the injectivity of the formations that you're working with. So it's a range that I'll present. For our technology, cost of storage ranges somewhere between maybe $5, and I'm doing this in dollars, $5 per ton up to 30 plus, and depending on various project parameters. So it's very difficult to give a single number. Where we started developing our technology in relation to geothermal power in Iceland, and that's the project that we've been operating in collaboration with our sister subsidiary On Power for 10 years now. There we're doing point source capture and storage, so there is no need for transport, and we do our storage onshore, again saving a lot in costs compared to what is done offshore. there because it's a concentrated source of CO2, and the higher concentration of CO2 in the emission stream, the more economical capture is, which is why it's so highly different from sector to sector. But in that particular point source project, we are for the full value chain. It's below the current EU ETS price and significantly below. But those are outliers. For the majority of the hard to abate sectors that we are predominantly focusing on providing storage for, there the costs are still, as already shared, higher, and in some cases significantly higher than EU ETS. So in most cases, support this is definitely needed to develop more projects so that we get to economies of scale and so that we can further develop whether it's capture, which is the highest cost of the value chain, or develop joint transport infrastructure that with scale will of course bring down the unit cost, and further develop storage so that we can do it more efficiently than done today. So yeah, some numbers from me. When it comes to Iceland and Norway being included in the 2030 targets, I mean, probably a lot of politics involved in this that I probably don't understand fully. But looking at it, from being a developer of storage project, it does seem a bit weird to segregate the continent in this way, so at least we're happy to be included and provide storage. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Eda. Lina.
So I think that on the question on CCS and fossil power, this is, of course, at the heart of the public perception issue. CCS is very often seen by actors, and has in the past as well, due to how the discussions were angled, seen as a way to prolong the fossil fuel age. So I think that here we need to be very careful, especially, we have models that are estimating different things. We should not confuse a model with an ambition. And I will say that we firmly believe that harder to abate sectors is where CCS should be focused. That's where the ambition should lies. And then we need to look on a case-to-case basis if there are further discussions. On the second question I would like to address is the question asked by Offshore Norway and the inclusion of Norway and Iceland in the Net Zero Industry Act. Now, I think, of course, we know that if we included Norway without having an upward adjustment, and now I'm speaking of Norway just since the question was from Offshore Norway, if we do that without upward adjusting the target, then of course that would be a reduction in ambition. We don't want this. We're doing this because of climate. I know the Commission have an assessment on the 50 million tons. I'm not going to question their experts, but I think it goes back to also what we discussed here in the beginning, because this was a big point of discussion. So I wanted to kind of, before we move on, mention that, of course, if Norway had been included in the Net Zero Industry Act, and there were significant delays in implementation, say, for example, that there were questions if the Norwegian continental shelf were included in the EEA agreement, or if perhaps there were just discussions on how long would this take to implement, we could end up in a situation where EU oil and gas producers have an obligation to fulfill, which they can fulfill in Norway, where Norwegian oil and gas producers don't have that same obligation. That might be a great business case for Norway. And a great economic opportunity, but again, that's not why we're doing this.
Thank you so much. We have run out of time, so I definitely want to thank the organizers for pulling together such a great event. I forgot to say that in the very beginning, but thanks so much. And before I hand the mic back to our Master of Ceremony, Estes, let's give a big round of applause for our wonderful speakers.